She disappeared from the public ledger. Not because she wanted to, because the family decided she should not be seen. The same money that built monuments and launched a presidency also bought a long, careful silence. How does a fortune become a shield for pain? Where did the cost show up? In trust documents, in quiet wings of private hospitals, in the careers that were made to cover a loss? Listen, I'll tell you that story. The year is 1919. Boston Harbor smells of salt and coal and something richer beneath it. Joseph P. Kennedy walks along the wharves thinking like a trader, not a father. He watches ships come in with crates stamped with foreign names, and he thinks of margins and markets. That talent, a knack for turning ports into profit, is the seed of a dynasty. By mid-century, Kennedy money moves in ways the public barely sees. Real estate holdings tucked into corporate shells, shipping lines and liquor import firms funneling steady income. Trusts written so tightly that control passes through a few hands, and the assets never touch a family member's ledger directly. To outsiders, it looks like power. To the family, it looks like everything. There is a balance sheet that never appears in interviews or memoirs. Not assets and liabilities alone. A second column, measures of privacy purchased, crises contained, reputations polished, scandals deferred. Capital as armor, capital as anesthetic. The entries are hard to quantify, but they add up. Let me take you through the numbers that matter. Not just dollars, but choices. Choices made by men who believed success required a tidy public face. Choices that cost some family members the chance to be seen on their own terms. The story starts with Joe Kennedy Sr. He arrives in Boston with a foothold in shipping and an appetite for risk. He invests aggressively in real estate, buys properties on both sides of the Atlantic, and steps into liquor imports at a moment when demand is volatile and profit margins are wide. He is, by design, a consolidator. He uses corporate structures to isolate risk. He leverages brokerage relationships and closes deals with blunt financial calculus. In plain terms, he builds cash flow, predictable rents, import revenues, and stakes in banks and trusts that compound quietly year after year. That fortune becomes useful in many ways. It underwrites education and influence. It pays for tutors, private schools, summer travel, legions of aides. It buys law firms to write wills and trusts, accountants to minimize taxes, and publicists to shape headlines. It bankrolls campaigns and donations that smooth political paths. And then there are the choices that money lets you make when life deviates from the screenplay. In one household room, a decision is taken behind closed doors. The reasons are complicated: medical, reputational, social. The family chooses containment over exposure. A daughter is moved from a visible life to a private one. She is not advertised in family profiles, not showcased at galas. She is kept away from journalists, from photographs, from the social scenes her siblings navigate in public. Her life continues, but away from the cameras. This kind of containment is expensive. It requires private caretakers, specialized medical attention, secure facilities. It requires lawyers to arrange guardianship, bankers to channel funds for indefinite care, and contracts to ensure that no one sells a story. Entire line items in the family ledger exist to pay for not being seen. At the same time, the Kennedy sons are building presence, one after another entering public office, seeking national recognition. Each campaign consumes dollars and cultivates narrative. A campaign manager needs polling, paid speechwriters, travel budgets, and donors, whose loyalty is often secured by dinner conversations in private rooms funded by the family. The wealth funds the ascent, but the ascent depends on control, of message, of image, of who is admitted to the portrait. There is a chilling symmetry in those expenditures. Money spent to make a candidate appear presidential. Money spent to keep a sister out of sight. Each line item protects the dynasty, but the protections are not evenly distributed. The public empire is polished. The private wounds are wrapped and shelved. Forensic economics looks for patterns like these. It asks, What did the cash flow accomplish besides returns on investment? Where did the family direct funds when the stakes were reputational rather than financial? You begin to see categories: legal infrastructures, trusts, custodial accounts, guardianships, structures that keep property intact while also locking decisions about heirs and access in a small number of hands. Medical expenditures, payment for private wards, specialized physicians, ongoing custodial care. These are often paid out of discretionary accounts designed to avoid public scrutiny. Media management, retainers for advisors, friendly placements, curated photographs, embargo agreements with reporters. Not necessarily bribery. More often a practiced skill of shaping the narrative. Political investments, campaign funding, support networks, and alliances that translate private capital into public legitimacy. All of these are defensive mechanisms. They function like insurance. Yet insurance has premiums. The premium here is silence. The price is visibility for the family, invisibility for select members. Let's return to individuals, because the ledger is human. The sons ride the publicity and bear its risks. The world watches a son become a senator, then a president. The sacrifices required to reach that stage are rarely itemized on financial statements, but they are there in the margins. Postponed romances, controlled interviews, rehearsed gestures, a relentless staff managing what is seen and what is hidden. But the daughters, at least the ones who did not fit the era's ideal of a political spouse or a public-facing heir, often bore a different cost. Some found roles as private philanthropists or devoted mothers. Others were intentionally sequestered. The family's resources could ensure comfortable environments, private clinics, and lifetime care. But those comforts did not equate to autonomy. Pause for a moment. Consider the paradox. The same capital that funded a candidacy also underwrote a decision to silence a family member. The public gains a leader. The private loses a voice. If you're finding this interesting and you want more deep dives into how money reshapes history and family, subscribe. That helps us keep producing stories that balance finance and feeling. After the war, as the Kennedys' public life crystallizes, the trust structures harden. Wealth is not just passed down, it is insulated. Joe Sr. and his advisors build trusts with contingent interests and appoint trustees who control distributions. The point is not theft. The point is predictability and control. A trustee can say no to a press liaison, limit access to funds, or withhold inheritance until certain conditions are met. Families use these tools to incentivize public behavior, or to disincentivize what they consider risky publicity. Those choices echo through generations. A trust's language can create incentives. Scholarships for children who avoid controversy. Grants to family members who align with public expectations. The economy of compliance is subtle but powerful. And then come the tragedies everyone remembers in headlines. Deaths in war, assassinations, choking scandals. These are the costs of visibility. Money, however abundant, cannot prevent guns or accidents. It cannot stop grief. But it can shape the aftermath. It can fund investigations and memorials, pay for travel of dignitaries, and manage the public record. It can also keep certain stories out of newspaper columns for years, whether through legal restraint, silence agreements, or a simple triangle of mutual discretion among elites and journalists. There is an eerie efficiency to how crisis spending is allocated. Funds are moved to crisis advisors. Public statements are drafted. A family's philanthropic foundation might pivot to commemorate a public loss. This is noble in appearance and strategic in practice. Mourning becomes part of legacy making. Pain is curated into monuments. Yet amidst all this, the private suffering of less prominent relatives continues. They receive care, but at a cost. Limited autonomy, restricted narratives, and often a life shaped by a constant trade-off between medical discretion and a right to be known. The dynasty's image must remain intact, so the family decides who is allowed a public interior life and who must live a private exterior one. Are these decisions purely mercenary? Sometimes. Often not. Sometimes they come from genuine concern, fear of institutional failures, or medical uncertainty. But when money is the instrument, the decisions tend to be centralized, singular, and difficult to contest. Power concentrates. The dynasty becomes a small governance system where assets and narratives are both policed. This raises ethical questions that modern listeners wrestle with today. When does stewardship become control? When does care become containment? How do fiduciary responsibilities intersect with human dignity? Forensic economics cannot answer these moral queries, but it can trace the flows that make them possible. When the financial ledger is laid beside the human ledger, discrepancies appear. High expenditures on privacy, low transparency, and a public brand that omits certain faces. There's also a cultural element. Early to mid-20th century America had different languages for disability and different tolerances for privacy in elite families. Decisions that shocked later generations were, at the time, often framed as protective. But protection is a double-edged sword. It can shield someone from ridicule and, at the same time, deprive them of recognition. As the decades pass, the public narrative grows around heroism and tragedy in equal measure. A father's ambition birthed presidents. It also shaped household decisions with long-term effects. The sons carried banners and loss. The daughters carried histories that were not always cataloged in biographies. Money preserved the myth and obscured some truths. In the final third of this story, we come to the crescendo. The emotional cost is not linearly related to dollars. You can buy the best care, the most attentive staff, the most loyal lawyers, and still fail to heal what is broken by secrecy. Generations inherit both wealth and the patterns that created it. Children learn that money solves problems by making them invisible. They internalize silence as a strategy. That psychological inheritance can be a heavier legacy than any trust document. Consider the ripple effects. A child who is kept from public life watches a sibling move through the spotlight. They learn to compare a private comfort to a public acclaim and find the comparison wanting. The quiet life is comfortable but empty of recognition. The public life is dangerous but seen. The family narrative valorizes the latter, and the private life is relegated. That dynamic shapes self-worth, marriage choices, and the ways future heirs relate to wealth itself. At the same time, wealth does something else. It gives power to resist the market of scandal. It funds institutions that outlast individuals, foundations, universities, donated libraries. These institutions codify a public legacy that often eclipses private suffering. They're the part of the balance sheet you can point to. Buildings with plaques, endowed programs, named centers. Those are powerful and they do good, but they can also serve as placards that distract from the human entries tucked into the confidential annexes. Now imagine a modern family with similar tools but a different media environment. Social media and investigative journalism make suppression harder. Transparency is demanded. The methods of containment shift. More legal strategies, more PR, but also more attempts to co-opt digital spaces. The balance sheet of trauma still exists, but the instruments change. Capital is still used to shield, but the shields are porous. That porosity forces choices, disclose and control the narrative, or keep secrets and risk exposure. Which is better? There is no single right answer. But there is a lesson that grows clearer as we examine the Kennedy case and others like it. Wealth is a resource for shaping how a family is remembered, but shaping memory has a human cost. The ledger expands to include not just monetary assets, but emotional liabilities that compound across generations. One final scene. An old ledger, thick with dust, sits in a banker's safe. On page after page, attorneys note distributions to caretakers and trustees. Nearby, a photograph of a young woman, smiling, uncaptioned, is tucked into an album. The photo was never published in the glossy family portfolios. It wasn't meant to be. And yet it survives precisely because someone, somewhere, cared enough to keep it. The question that lingers is this: what would a different equation look like? What if capital were used not to hide, but to amplify the voices of those in the margins? What if dynastic wealth funded autonomy as much as image? The balance sheet would look different then. You would see line items for education tailored to individual aspirations, for public advocacy, for transparent medical care, for storytelling royalties for those who had been silenced. That is not a fantasy. It is a possibility that some modern heirs try to enact. The Kennedys' story, with its bright public victories and dim private corners, offers a prism. It is not merely a tale of success and sorrow. It is a lesson about how money, for all its usefulness, cannot translate pain into progress unless empathy drives its allocation. Capital can secure a candidacy and protect a reputation. It can also preserve privacy and perpetuate silence. The balance sheet of trauma is real because silence accrues interest. It compounds in ways that dollars alone cannot fix. If you want more conversations that pull apart money, power, and the human costs between them, subscribe and join the next episode. We'll explore another family, another ledger, another set of choices. For now, remember this. Dynasties build with ambition and finance, but the stories that survive are not only the ones printed in history books. They are also the small, private narratives that never got a page. Those untold lines matter. They alter legacy. They teach us that stewardship means more than preserving capital. It means stewarding dignity. So when you think about power, also think about what it protects and what it hides. The balance sheet of trauma will not balance itself. It requires someone willing to account for the human costs, to inventory the silence, and to decide, finally, what to do with both wealth and truth.